A quiet diner booth in suburban Chicago on a rainy Tuesday morning. A woman in a tailored wool coat sits waiting for her coffee, watching the rain blur the window. Resting on the table is a small, structured leather handbag. She presses her thumb against the brass clasp, and it opens with a sharp, satisfying click. Instantly, a familiar scent escapes. Warm leather mixed with pressed powder, a hint of violet candy, and cold cream. But the strange part is this. Compared to the heavy, cluttered tote bags women carry today, her purse was impossibly small. It held no glowing screens, no tangled wires, no chaotic receipts. Yet, she possessed everything required to face the world with absolute dignity. She was never caught off guard. She carried discipline, not distractions. These are 15 items every American woman in the 1950s carried in her purse, and why the modern industry made us forget them. Now, before we dive in, tap that subscribe button. You will not want to miss what is coming next. When you look inside a vintage handbag, you do not just see old objects. You see a mindset that no longer exists. Today, we are encouraged to buy a different product for every minor inconvenience, filling massive tote bags with plastic bottles, disposable wipes, and tangled chargers. But a 1950s woman did not need bulk. She needed efficiency. The objects she carried did not vanish because they stopped working. They disappeared because they were built to last, and an industry cannot make a fortune selling a woman something she only has to buy once. The deeper you look, the less old-fashioned these habits seem. By the time we reach number 1, you will realize this was never just about what she carried. It was about who she was expected to be. And the countdown starts with something simple, resting quietly at the bottom of the bag, meant for unspoken moments. Number 15. The tin of hard candies. Deep inside the leather interior, often resting at the very bottom, was a small metal tin of hard candies. Usually it was C. Howard's Violets, or a roll of lifesavers that cost a shiny nickel. When you shook the purse, you could hear the faint, muffled rattle of the sweet against the tin. A 1950s woman did not carry these merely as a snack. They were a social tool. If a dry cough threatened to interrupt a quiet church service, or a restless child needed calming on a long bus ride, the tin appeared. In a modern world where we use glowing screens to ignore the strangers around us, offering a violet candy was a subtle, elegant way to break the ice. It was an offering of goodwill that fit in the palm of her hand. Number 14. The matchbook of bobby pins. Before the era of messy buns and casual grooming, a stray piece of hair was an unacceptable defeat. Tucked neatly into a side pocket was a small cardboard matchbook, but instead of matches, it held a perfectly aligned row of bobby pins. When a sudden gust of wind disturbed her set curls, she did not panic. With a swift, practiced motion, she would slide the cold metal pin against her scalp, securing the loose strand blindly. The modern beauty industry sells us endless styling sprays and heated tools, but a 1950s woman knew that true grooming was maintained throughout the day. Looking put together was never an accident. It was a constant, quiet discipline. Number 13. The emergency nylon stockings. In the mid-century, stepping out of the house bare-legged was simply not done. Women wore nylon stockings, which were notoriously fragile. A sudden run or ladder in the nylon was considered a public embarrassment. That is why almost every woman carried a backup pair, carefully folded inside a small silk pouch to prevent snagging. If a tear happened, she would excuse herself to the powder room, enjoying the soft rustle of sheer fabric as she rolled the fresh stockings over her knees. Today, in the age of stretch fabrics and disposable fashion, a wardrobe malfunction is laughed off. But back then, she refused to let a cheap snag rob her of her dignity. She was always prepared to fix the problem herself. Number 12. The Kisslock coin purse. Nestled among the soft items was something heavy, a small leather coin purse with a brass kisslock closure. Opening it produced a sharp, metallic snap, followed by the distinct clink of silver dimes, nickels, and quarters. This was not a wallet. It was a survival kit. The coins were specifically gathered for a payphone call in an emergency, exact bus fare, or a quick tip for a bellhop. We now move through the world tapping plastic cards or phones, our money completely invisible. But there was a comforting, tangible weight to carrying real silver, knowing you had the exact change to navigate the city on your own terms. Notice what these first 4 items had in common. None of them were for entertainment or vanity. They were designed to ensure that she was never a burden to anyone else, never unprepared, and never caught looking careless. What we call anxiety today, they simply called being ready. But as we move further down the list, the items shift. The next group of tools moved from physical readiness to social grace, proving that a woman's handbag was also her mobile office. Number 11. The gold fountain pen or slim pencil. Tucked into a narrow leather loop inside the purse was a gleaming gold fountain pen, or perhaps a slim mechanical pencil. When a 1950s woman needed to write a check at the grocery counter or jot down a recipe from a neighbor, she did not scramble for a cheap disposable plastic ballpoint. She unclipped her pen, feeling its balanced weight in her hand. The soft scratch of the nib against paper was deliberate. Today, we type fleeting information into the cloud, where it is easily deleted and forgotten. But writing something down in ink back then was a commitment. It meant the information, and the person giving it, was worth remembering. Number 10. The tiny address book. Right next to the pen was the tiny address book. Bound in soft, genuine leather, and often no larger than a playing card, it featured delicate alphabetical tabs along the edge. Inside, the pages were filled with elegant, slanting cursive. It held more than just phone numbers. It contained the lifeblood of her social world. Birthdays, the butcher's direct line, the doctor's office. To lose this book was to lose her community. We now carry thousands of contacts in our smartphones, yet feel more disconnected than ever. Her little book proved that a strong network did not require a glowing screen, only careful attention. Number 9. The Bayer aspirin tin. Somewhere in the depths of the bag sat a small, flat Bayer aspirin tin. It had a sliding metal lid that opened with a sharp, distinct scrape. Inside rested just 3 or 4 powdery white tablets, creating a soft metallic rattle when she walked. If a headache struck while she was running errands, she did not broadcast her discomfort. She slipped a tablet out, swallowed it discreetly with a sip of water at a lunch counter, and simply carried on. It was an era where enduring minor physical discomfort with grace was seen as a virtue. It was a quiet resilience that modern consumer culture, which encourages us to complain and buy an instant cure for every mild inconvenience, has entirely forgotten. Number 8. The perfume solid. Instead of a fragile glass bottle that could shatter or leak, she carried a perfume solid. Often crafted by brands like Estée Lauder, it looked like a tiny, ornate jewel box. When she snapped it open, a concentrated, waxy fragrance, perhaps rose, gardenia, or lily of the valley, greeted her. She would press her index finger into the smooth surface and gently dab it behind her ears or on her wrists. Unlike modern aerosol sprays that aggressively announce a woman's presence before she even enters a room, applying solid perfume was an intimate, silent gesture. The scent was meant only for those standing close enough to be invited into her personal space. By this point, the pattern is no longer about practical survival. It is about standards. The objects in her purse required care, refill, and intention, qualities that the modern disposable industry cannot easily monetize. But as we approach the final items, the focus shifts again. The next few rules were different. They were not just about solving problems. They were the silent armor she wore to face a judgmental world. Number 7. The tortoiseshell pocket comb. Slipped into a flat inner pocket was a small faux tortoiseshell comb. Its smooth, rounded teeth were designed not for detangling wet hair, but for reviving a structured set. Before stepping out of a car or entering a crowded room, a 1950s woman would take a deep breath, pull out this little comb, and quickly smooth the crown of her hair. Today, we pause before entering a room to nervously check our phone notifications. Back then, That pause was used to physically ground herself, ensuring her presentation was flawless before facing the public. It was a brief, private ritual of composure. Number 6. The matchbook sewing kit. No larger than a pack of gum, a tiny cardboard matchbook sewing kit was always on hand. Inside, it held 2 needles pre-threaded with black and white cotton thread, alongside a spare button and a tiny safety pin. If a hem dropped or a button popped while she was out shopping, it was handled immediately. Modern fast fashion has taught us that a torn seam means the garment is ruined, ready to be tossed away and replaced. But a 1950s woman possessed the skill to mend. She did not view a loose thread as a disaster. She viewed it as a momentary task. True elegance was built on self-reliance. The closer we get to number 1, the less this is about objects and the more it is about identity. These were not just habits. They were quiet standards, repeated until they became character. Number 5. A pair of white backup gloves. In the mid-century, a lady rarely left the house without gloves. But the truly prepared woman carried a spare pair of folded white cotton or kid leather gloves at the bottom of her purse. Gloves were more than just a fashion statement. They were a psychological boundary. They protected her hands from the grime of subway poles, brass door handles, and public counters. When she slipped them on, smoothing the soft fabric over each finger, she was drawing a line between her personal grace and the dusty reality of the outside world. Number 4. The gold powder compact. Heavy, cold and gleaming, a metal powder compact, often from Stratton or Coty, was the crown jewel of the handbag. It featured an etched brass or enamel lid and a clear mirror inside, smelling faintly of classic spun face powder. Pressing the velvet puff to her nose was a classic mid-century gesture, but the most iconic detail was the sound, that sharp, mechanical snap when she closed the lid. Looking in that tiny mirror was not an act of vanity. It was a moment of self-correction, a way to make sure her armor was still intact. The industry eventually replaced these gorgeous, refillable metal compacts with cheap plastic that shatters in a month because durability does not generate endless profit. What looks small from the outside often carries the heaviest meaning. And as we reach the final 3 items, we move away from the mirror and into the very heart of the 1950s woman. Number 3. The signature red lipstick. Down at the very bottom, rolling loosely against the leather lining, was a heavy, cold brass tube of lipstick. It was often a classic Revlon shade, perhaps the iconic cherries in the snow or fire and ice. When she pulled off the metal cap, it smelled distinctly of wax, rosewater, and old Hollywood. Applying lipstick in the 1950s was not merely a cosmetic step, it was a psychological tool. When a woman felt utterly exhausted, overwhelmed by a house full of demanding children, or dismissed by the outside world, she did not broadcast her frustration. She retreated to a mirror, wiped her mouth clean, and painted it a bold, defiant red. It was a visual reset, a way of drawing a line in the sand and saying she was still in control. The brass tube was small, but its impact was massive. It was not vanity. It was armor. Number 2. The handwritten errand list. Tucked neatly into the side zipper compartment was a single piece of paper, always folded into perfect, crisp quarters. Unfolding it revealed a handwritten grocery and errand list, penned in that elegant, slanting cursive, using the gold fountain pen we mentioned earlier. Back then, there were no digital calendars buzzing with constant notifications, no apps to remind her to buy milk. The entire functioning of a 1950s household, from the butcher's specific cut of meat to the cobbler's shoe repair, from the dry cleaner's receipt to the Sunday dinner menu, was mapped out on this fragile sheet of paper. This list was the blueprint of a family's survival and comfort. It proved that a woman's purse was not a chaotic junk drawer meant to hold random debris. It was the highly organized mobile headquarters of a very capable manager. And now we reach the one that explains all the others. Number 1 is the reason these habits still feel deeply personal decades later. The final item was never just about the object itself. It was about what happened around it. Number 1. The monogrammed linen handkerchief. If you look in a modern bag today, you might find a crumpled paper tissue meant to be used once, soiled, and immediately thrown into the trash. But a 1950s woman carried a square of soft white linen, often with her initials delicately embroidered in the corner, smelling faintly of lavender or laundry starch. Here is the unspoken truth about the linen handkerchief. She rarely carried it for herself. She carried it for the world around her. She used it to quickly dab the chin of a messy grandchild, to discreetly offer to a grieving friend in a quiet church pew, or to dust off a wooden park bench before sitting down. And when the day was over, that handkerchief was never thrown away. It was brought home, washed by hand in a porcelain sink, hung to dry, and then meticulously ironed flat. Somewhere, in the memory of every family, a grandmother is still standing at a kitchen table, pressing a hot iron over a small linen square. The paper industry replaced this beautiful, enduring object with cheap tissues because they wanted us to buy convenience over and over again. But what they really erased was the dignity of caring for an object. It was not a disposable product. It was a standard of grace, passed from mother to daughter without a single word. The brass clasp of the purse snapped shut, and she was ready for whatever the day demanded. What disappeared from the modern handbag was not just the heavy brass compact, the tortoiseshell comb, or the tin of hard candies. The objects did not vanish because they failed. They vanished because the modern industry convinced us that buying disposable, plastic convenience was better than maintaining lasting quality. But when a 1950s woman packed her purse, she was not just gathering random items. She was packing her independence. She was making sure she had the tools to fix a torn hem, soothe a restless child, calm a sudden headache, and rebuild her armor before facing a judgmental world. That kind of quiet self-reliance cannot be bought on a drugstore shelf. Somewhere, in the quiet corners of our family memories, the scent of pressed powder and warm leather still lingers. A grandmother is snapping her purse shut, pulling on her white gloves, and stepping out the front door with absolute grace. And without a single word, the lesson is passed down. What is the one item you always remember your mother or grandmother carrying in her purse? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this video brought back a piece of your past, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the video on your screen to explore more forgotten wisdom from the women who raised us.